Welcome to Reddit Revenge Stories. Did you know over 90% of people watch these videos but don't subscribe? If you enjoy stories of justice and payback, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to like the video if you're ready for today's story. Let's get to the story. My name is Darren, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife's betrayal and took back control of my life, piece by calculated piece. I met Leah in college. She was studying interior design, and I was in mechanical engineering. Our paths crossed at a mutual friend's art exhibit. She had a way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I didn't think someone like her would go for a guy like me, quiet, methodical, the kind who noticed the way gears turned more than how people did. But she did, or at least she pretended to. We dated for 3 years before getting married. Life was decent. I started working for an aerospace firm. She opened her own design studio. We moved into a nice suburban home in Ohio, close to both our families. On the surface, we had everything: good jobs, weekend getaways, mutual friends. But looking back, I realized there were red flags I chose to ignore. It started with small things: how she began working late more often, how she guarded her phone like it was the launch codes for a nuclear arsenal, how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore when she looked at me. I dismissed them, told myself she was just stressed, that people go through phases, that she was still my Leah. The real shift happened after our 5th anniversary. I had surprised her with a weekend cabin trip in the Smoky Mountains. She seemed thrilled at first, but spent most of the time glued to her phone, taking calls in hushed tones and stepping outside for long walks. I chalked it up to work, but noticed how she flinched when I touched her shoulder, or how she'd suddenly remember a meeting every time I tried to plan something romantic. One night, a week after the trip, I came home early. There was a car parked a block away from our house, engine still warm. I recognized the silhouette of the man behind the wheel. It was Alex, one of her longtime clients. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe he'd just dropped something off. But he peeled away as soon as I pulled into the driveway, which felt off. Leah was in the kitchen, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. She jumped when she saw me like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. Her excuse was paper thin, said she'd been trying it on for a charity event. But the air felt different, charged with something I couldn't name yet. That night, I started paying attention. I installed a keylogger on our shared desktop and synced her phone messages to my email using software meant for parental controls. I wasn't proud of it, but I had no. Within a week, the truth poured in like poison. Her conversations with Alex were constant, flirty, intimate, full of shared jokes and emojis she never used with me. The most damning part wasn't what they said, but what they didn't. There were so many gaps in time, chunks of hours missing from her day. She was smart, careful not to say anything outright incriminating in texts. But you don't call someone "my heartbeat" and say "last night felt right" if it's strictly business. I didn't confront her. Not right away. I needed time. I needed a plan. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband screaming in the driveway while his wife looked on with pity. Number. If she wanted to lie to me, she was going to regret thinking I'd be too weak to do anything about it. The first thing I did was get my financial house in order. I moved half of our joint savings into a separate account under my name only. Told her the bank was offering better returns on a promotional rate. She barely batted an eye. I quietly sold off a few of my collectible tools and transferred the money into crypto. Harder to trace, easier to move. I started visiting a divorce lawyer during my lunch breaks. Told them everything: my suspicions, the data, the digital trail. Then I went deeper. I reached out to Alex's ex-wife, Camille. I had remembered her vaguely from a Christmas party 2 years prior, polite, soft-spoken, clearly uncomfortable around Leah. When I called her and introduced myself, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was wondering how long it would take you to call me." That sentence hit me like a freight train. Camille had known. Not everything, but enough. She had caught Alex lying about business trips, had found receipts for dinners he never mentioned. She told me she suspected Leah had been the other woman even while we were married. I thanked her for her honesty and promised not to drag her into anything public. But the more she spoke, the more pieces of my puzzle fell into place. I started creating distance at home. No more spontaneous hugs. No more Friday night movies. I made excuses for everything. Claimed I was tired, swamped at work, dealing with stress. Leah noticed, but instead of confronting me, she just drifted. Like she was relieved I wasn't trying anymore. That stung more than anything. 3 weeks later, I faked a business trip, told her I'd be gone for 3 days. In reality, I rented a room, 2 blocks from our house, and installed a camera in our living room, disguised as an air purifier. I also placed one in the garage and another in the kitchen. It took her less than 24 hours to invite Alex over. He walked in like he owned the place, opened our fridge, sat on our couch, laughed with my wife. That's when I knew there was no misunderstanding, no emotional affair to rationalize. This was deliberate, intimate betrayal. But I didn't lash out. I waited. I needed her to feel safe, to think she'd gotten away with it. The final straw came a week later when I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to a friend, saying things like, "Darren's gotten so boring lately, and I feel like Alex actually sees me." That was it. I had enough to bury her socially, financially, and legally. But I didn't want to destroy her yet. I wanted her to feel the ground shifting beneath her feet just like I had. So I smiled more at home, cooked dinner, asked her about her day, even brought home flowers. She was wary at first but eventually leaned back into the act. That was when I began the next phase. I went to Alex's office posing as a potential client and made sure to get copies of all their client interactions for reference. I spoke to mutual friends, subtly bringing up Leah's strange behavior lately, planting seeds of doubt. I made sure they started noticing how often Alex and Leah were at the same events. Gossip spreads fast when guided. I also updated my will, removed her as the beneficiary, and assigned my assets to a trust in my nephew's name. Then I contacted a private investigator and handed over everything: locations, dates, messages, video recordings. He packaged it all neatly into a report that would be difficult to ignore in court. Now, all that's left is the final move. She has no idea it's coming, and that's exactly how I want it. I remember the morning I decided to begin the unraveling of Leah's carefully constructed lie. I woke up, made coffee, and watched her move around the kitchen like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't been cheating on me with another man in our own home. It was surreal. She talked about paint colors for the guest bedroom, about how she wanted to host a brunch next month. I just nodded, sipping my coffee and letting her believe everything was normal. That was the beauty of my plan. It relied on her thinking she was still in control. What she didn't know was that every word she spoke, every movement she made in that house, was feeding into a timeline I'd created. A timeline of betrayal. I had everything documented: screenshots, video footage, call logs, even her social media activities synced to a burner phone. All of it meticulously organized and time-stamped. I started small. A few weeks after my fake business trip, I printed an anonymous note and had it delivered to Leah's studio. It said, "He knows. You should be more careful." Just that. 7 words. The same day, I removed a few framed photos of us from the living room and left the nail holes bare. Subtle things. I wanted her on edge without knowing why. That evening, I watched her pace around the house after opening the envelope. She looked through drawers, checked her phone repeatedly. Her anxiety was palpable. But when I walked through the door that night, I acted as if everything was fine. I kissed her on the cheek, asked what she wanted for dinner, and watched her fake a smile so tight it looked like it hurt. She didn't mention the note. That told me one thing: she was scared, but she didn't know who she was afraid of. That was perfect. My next move was even quieter. I changed the locks to my office in the garage where I kept my private documents. She noticed, of course, asked why. I told her I was working on a confidential design for a client at my firm and couldn't risk any leaks. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the door like it had turned into a wall between us. Around this time, I scheduled a meeting with my divorce attorney. We drew up the paperwork: irreconcilable differences, no children, division of assets. Because I had shifted the financial balance earlier, most of the liquid cash was already out of her reach. The house, bought in my name before we were married, was mine outright. The lawyer added a clause: Due to her infidelity and misuse of shared resources, I would be seeking a disproportionate settlement. The documentation I'd gathered made that more than plausible, but I still didn't file. Instead, I set the final phase into motion. It started with a dinner invitation. I told Leah I wanted to reconnect. Suggested we dine at her favorite rooftop restaurant, the one we hadn't been to in over a year. She was suspicious at first, but curiosity won. I made reservations, booked a table with a view, even wore the navy blazer she'd once said brought out my eyes. As we sat there eating steak and sipping wine, I acted the part of the remorseful husband trying to save his marriage. I told her I missed us, that I wanted to try again, that I believed we could still fix what was broken. And her response? She smiled, reached across the table, and said, "I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly." That was the moment I knew there was no remorse in her. She wasn't sorry. She had never intended to come clean or end the affair. She was just waiting to see if I'd stay too numb to act. I let the dinner play out, dropped her off at home, watched her walk into our house with a little bounce in her step, like she'd won some silent game. But what she didn't know was that while we were eating, Alex's wife Camille had sent a copy of the PI report to Leah's business partner. Camille didn't want public drama either, but she hated Alex enough to make sure Leah suffered consequences in her own world too. The very next day, Leah was pulled into a meeting at her studio. Her partner Monica confronted her with the photos of Alex and Leah holding hands in a hotel lobby, entering and exiting the same room multiple times. The timestamp aligned with dates Leah had claimed she was outsourcing materials. Monica didn't fire her outright, but she froze her out of the next big client pitch, citing a need to evaluate priorities. Leah came home furious, ranting about betrayal in the workplace. Oh, the irony. The next week, I let the cracks widen. I stopped pretending. Didn't hide my coldness. Didn't ask how her day went or where she was going. I came home late, sometimes not at all. I let her feel the growing distance. And just when she started asking if everything was okay, I served her the divorce papers. On a Tuesday morning, while she was pouring coffee. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it, eyes darting across the lines. I stood there calmly, sipping my own coffee, and said, "I know everything, Leah. Every single thing." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came, and I didn't need to hear any. I walked out the front door without waiting for a reply. I drove to the office, played out my day like it was any other. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Of course, she didn't let it end there. A few days later, she begged for a conversation. I agreed, more for closure than anything. We met at a neutral spot, a public park where we wouldn't cause a scene. She wore no makeup, looked tired, worn down. She said she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. I listened, let her talk. Then I asked her, "How long would you have kept lying if I hadn't found out?" She didn't answer. That told me all I needed. I told her about the cameras, about the data, about Camille, about everything I had known for months. I watched the color drain from her face. "You could have talked to me," she said quietly. "I did," I said, "for years. You just stopped listening." After that meeting, she tried to delay the divorce proceedings, claimed emotional distress, wanted counseling. My lawyer made it clear we weren't entertaining that. I had already built my case, and the judge was unlikely to be sympathetic to someone who had violated the trust and sanctity of the marriage. We moved forward swiftly. Leah moved out a month later. I didn't help her pack. She took her clothes, her files, a few books. Everything else stayed. I changed the locks that night. That weekend, I repainted the bedroom. It's funny. Revenge isn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't fire and fury. It was quiet, measured, a slow disassembly of the lie she tried to live in, and the best part, she never saw it coming. After Leah moved out, the house echoed with a kind of silence I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled. No footsteps down the hall, no calls from the bathroom asking where she left her keys, no perfume lingering in the bedroom after she'd left for the day. It was the silence of peace, not loneliness, and I welcomed it. The divorce proceeded exactly as I had planned. My attorney submitted the documentation I had gathered, and Leah, realizing she was cornered, didn't fight too hard. She knew she was outmatched, legally, financially, emotionally. I had her checkmated before she even knew we were playing. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about clarity, about delivering the consequences she had spent months thinking she'd never have to face. Alex, her affair partner, didn't get off lightly either. His wife Camille filed for divorce shortly after I served Leah. She sent him the photos, the call logs, even a transcript of the conversations I'd pulled from the spyware. Alex tried to fight it, of course, threatened legal action against me for invasion of privacy, but I had been careful. Everything I gathered was done through legal means or through mutual property access. I had even consulted a digital forensics expert beforehand to make sure my tracks were clean. His threats went nowhere. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Camille walked away with the house, full custody of their kids, and the better half of their savings. Alex had to move into a small apartment downtown, the kind you hear sirens outside of all night. Fitting, I thought. Leah, on the other hand, tried to pretend like she was moving forward. She made a few public social media posts, quotes about new beginnings and finding yourself after pain. I ignored them, but what she couldn't fake were the little things that slipped out in the background. Her business started slowing down. Monica, her partner, began phasing her out of projects. The rumors about the affair had made their way through the local circles, and clients were backing away. People don't like to associate with scandal, especially when it's packaged in fake smiles and forced inspiration posts. She reached out to me once, just once, after the divorce was finalized. Sent a message saying she missed me. Said she made a mistake. That she didn't know what she had until it was gone. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I'd already said everything I needed to say by walking away with my dignity intact and her fantasy world in ashes. But I didn't stop there. Revenge, true revenge, isn't just about punishment. It's about rebuilding something better in the ruins. It's about becoming stronger, smarter, more whole. And that's what I set out to do. I started with myself, got back into shape, began running in the mornings, joined a local gym. Not because I wanted to show her what she lost, but because I wanted to reclaim what I had allowed myself to lose. My health, my energy, my focus. I picked up my old hobbies again. Woodworking, photography, even sketching, things I had abandoned during the long nights I spent trying to save a marriage she had already checked out of. I made new friends, real friends. People who didn't know me as Leah's husband, but as a man with his own story. I traveled a little, visited my brother in Denver, took a solo trip to the coast, even spent a week hiking in Montana. Each day felt like another step away from the weight I used to carry. Eventually, I sold the house. It had too many memories, too many ghosts of her laughter echoing off the walls, too many shadows of moments I now knew were lies. I bought a new place across town, smaller but full of light. It had a porch that faced west, and every evening I sat out there with a cup of tea or a glass of bourbon, watching the sun go down with no bitterness in my heart. Because here's the thing, revenge isn't about watching them suffer. It's about healing so deeply that their absence feels like a blessing. One day, a year after everything unraveled, I saw Leah again. I was at the farmer's market picking up fresh bread and coffee beans. She was by herself, holding a canvas bag and browsing flowers. She looked thinner, a little older, and more tired than I remembered. When she saw me, she froze. I gave her a nod, polite, detached, and kept walking. That was the last time I saw her. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever take her back if she begged, if she truly changed, if she showed up crying at my door, and I always give them the same answer. No, not because I hate her, but because I respect myself. What Leah did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, repeated, intentional, and calculated. And choices have consequences. I gave her every chance to come clean, to tell the truth, to own up to the cracks before they became fractures. But she didn't. She gambled on my silence, on my softness, on the belief that I would never do what I eventually did. And now, I'm free. Free from the lies. Free from the nights spent wondering why she wasn't answering her phone. Free from the weight of pretending things were fine when they never were. I've rebuilt my life from the ground up, brick by brick, and this time, it's mine. Every inch of it. That's the real revenge, not her tears, not her downfall, but my peace, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.